So we were talking about the strenuous life, right? Like, I realize how much easier it is to live a life of comfort. It's so easy, right? The problem is it's the word decadent. And once a society becomes decadent, they're no longer vigilant for their rights. They're no longer vigilant of their growth as a nation. And so TR took the reins of power when America was at the greatest point it been in its history. You know, that was the height at that point. And he didn't say, well, this is as good as it gets. He said, how can we be better? You know, how can we move forward? And so that's one of the reasons why I'm a huge fan of TR. So let's take a look at his conservation. Now, I want to point out the difference between TR and his great friend, John Muir. And if you've read about who John Muir is, John Muir went on to found the Sierra Club and was the nation's first really great environmentalist. So TR, in many ways, differed from his good friend philosophically. Now, both of the men were environmentalists, meaning they cared about the future of the environment for future generations. So, you know, if you think about with this westward expansion, there was massive ecological devastation as a result of it. So TR belonged to a group of thought called conservation. John Muir belonged to a group of thought called preservation. So the conservationists believed that you could manage the wilderness so that the wilderness was both used by like businesses, like logging and things like that, forestry, but at the same time, the forest would be maintained. So you would, you know, use my roommate in college, a good buddy of mine, is the forester for this region of Virginia. He is the head of the state forestry department for our area. He's our forestry agent. And he, while I was with Tech, we get to talking about what he kind of considered the hippie environmentalists, the become tree huggers, you know, who would stop any logging at all. And he said, look, it's better for the long-term future of the forest to cut down some trees, you know, and to plant new trees. And so we were talking about that, and you know, he loved nature and loved forest. So that's President Roosevelt was a conservationist, which means he wanted to keep the lands for the future while at the same time allowing public use of the land, right? Muir viewed nature as a cathedral. So when you went into it, that's what it was. It should be in its pristine state without any sort of human impact. And that's kind of like the preservationist mentality. So you should certainly know that. Let me give these two guys here the reading guide. Sorry, I already got it. You got it? I did not. You have all of them? No, that's like 7 or 10 or something. Certainly can give you help. So yeah, definitely know the difference between conservation and preservation. So his friend, Gifford Pinchot, so you'll notice I keep saying friend, I mean that. Like TR hiked into Yosemite with John Muir to the mountaintops. Let's see, I think I may have a picture here. No, not here. So I'll show you, I'll pop one up in a second. But TR was a huge like hiker. You know, I mean, he made it cool before like modern America made it cool. You know, like this guy absolutely loved climbing mountains, you know, simply because they were there. And, you know, he absolutely adored the wilderness. He spent a huge amount of time there. So here he is with his good friend, John Muir. And as a backpacker myself, I love this picture. Ooh, massive picture. Let me just minimize this. You guys know my tricks. Let me get on down here. Kind of shrink it a lot. So the guy with the sort of hipster beard there, you know, working the long beard, that's John Muir, M-U-I-R. And this is at Yosemite. They had just climbed up, I forget which mountain it is. And what you might notice about this picture is the fact that it's a picture. Now, they didn't have iPhones, so that should tell you something. TR carried with him photographers wherever he went. So TR has a picture of himself jumping, using a horse, and it's jumping, and it's a tough jump. Like this jumping horse, you know how horses jump over obstacles. It's not an easy thing to accomplish. And so he, you know, I keep typing TR. He brought along with him a journalist, or actually a photographer, to take a picture of him doing it. He loved it. He always wanted to get these kind of things. And so he took this picture while he was jumping, right? Let me see if I can find it. This one's, I don't want to steal it. Here we go. And he's grinning at the camera. And when he finished, when he landed the jump, you know, and he got off the horse, he asked the photographer, "Hey, did you get it? Because if you didn't, I can do it again." So here you see TR like jumping over. Now this is like a rendering of that. It's not the actual picture, but you know, he jumped over this large fence, and he did it twice. Now that's a real picture of him here, so I can get that one. So yeah, he would be what we would call today aware of his publicity. So he had like a press agent, so to speak, who he would have these pictures. So he was very conscious of the fact that he was a public figure. So he wanted to be a role model. Now, this has led to later funny memes that are not accurate, but I'll show it to you because why not? This is related to his run later as president. The TR is depicted riding on a moose. So if you ever see this picture, it's a great picture. You know, it is completely photoshopped. Like that never happened. Like TR never rode a moose across an Alaskan river. But nonetheless, think of it as kind of character. Like, TR would love that. He would love that joke, I think. So here he is with John Muir in Yosemite, and his friend Gifford Pinchot wanted to make sure what we would now call today sustainable forestry, meaning if you are going to log massive trees, and they were cutting down the redwoods, they were cutting the biggest trees in history down, right? You've got to manage them properly. This can't be, under the Department of Forestry, this can't be something you just, like, we would call this clear cut. So if you've ever driven past a field that's nothing but stumps, they call that clear cutting, just hideous looking, right? So perhaps most importantly for me, and somehow it doesn't make it in your book, which is insane, is the Antiquities Act. Because the Antiquities Act is the law that allows the President of the United States to declare some place as a historic landmark. So in other words, it is like a monument itself. And so under the Antiquities Act, President Roosevelt is going to declare millions of acres of public land, particularly one of my favorites, the Everglades. So he does the Everglades, and he does lots and lots of land in the West. So try to imagine if you've ever been to a place where it's called a national park, right? A national park. That means that a president has set that aside. So perhaps some of his, you know, this is Monument Valley I'm about to stick up and show you, which is part of Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Here's the picture of it. So TR is going to set aside this land and say, I don't want to have a McDonald's on this. Not literally, but you get the idea. Like, this should not be disrupted by a Dollar General and some golden arches. Right, not commercialize this. This is reserved for the American people, for posterity. And so that's the Antiquities Act. So the Everglades, Monument Valley is another one I'm remembering. And so lots of these beautiful locations in America that if corporate interests had their way, would simply be, turned into another commercial zone, another development. And I think that TR recognized that this was and by the way, your book makes the point, I agree, of all the things that's tangible, meaning like you can touch, it's his legacy of a conservationist that is most tangible. Because had he not done this, then millions of acres would probably have been developed. And just had, one more road put on this and one more strip mine put on here. And so that is to me, one of his greatest legacies. And one of my favorite things about it is that he said, and by the way, this law is still in effect, the Antiquities Act. Presidents routinely order that something be set aside for conservation. Now, another law that was passed during his presidency is the Newlands Act. And I'll remind you that the Newlands Act is cool in a way because it's named after Senator Newlands, but it would take land that was dry. So imagine like arid, like desert level quality rivers or land rather. And then it would use the sale of public lands for irrigation projects. So public funded irrigation projects. And so this is called reclamation, they used to call it, like reclaiming the desert from, well, reclaiming the land from the desert and turning it into watery areas and stuff like that. So you had these big time irrigation projects that began to be developed. And so reclamation became much more a part of westward expansion. Keep in mind, once you got past the 100th meridian, the number one concern was rainfall. The number one concern was where am I going to get water from? It's still the number one concern in a lot of those areas, particularly around like the Four Corners, if you know where that part of the states are. So I would be familiar with the Newlands Act and the Antiquities Act, right? Both of which are landmark pieces of legislation for long-term future. Now I mentioned Muir. Muir is the founder. I'll put this up here. He is the founder of the Sierra Club, and I'll be honest with you. If I were all due diligence, I'm a member of the Sierra Club, so I'm a big fan, obviously, of what they are. And I'm an environmentalist by nature. I've really, as I've gotten older, enjoyed this more and more, camping in the wilderness, particularly with my children. I was a Boy Scout in school, so you can imagine I had some experience. So yeah, this is John Muir with the president, and really this policy of taking land and setting it aside for posterity is really one of the most beautiful things I think about his presidency. Okay, really, it's really one of the lasting legacies. And again, Roosevelt was probably one of the smartest at managed use or multiple use management. So let's put this down too. If you think about Yellowstone, the idea is that you can use these parks to have for recreation and amusement, and then the debate becomes, should we allow four-wheelers in them? Because you have like noise, not near TR, but today, the arguments are, noise pollution, the smell of gasoline, does that disrupt the environment, the whole experience. So multi-use is trying to figure out how to not go too far on the environmental argument to the point where you alienate everyone, right? And unfortunately today you have sort of ridiculous positions being made that gets in the way of progress. So for example, when Texas lost its power the other week, some on the right immediately blamed wind turbines. I'm like, that's ridiculous. They have wind in Iceland. They have wind turbines in Russia. It was not the reason their power failed. That being said, wind turbines do eventually break down. Like you have to replace them, and they don't biodegrade. So like that's a problem that needs solution for. We need to fix how the wind turbines are made. What we don't need to argue is whether or not wind turbines work in cold or not, since that's absolutely a fact. So what's interesting about TR is he would kind of cut through the BS and say, well, how do we fix this? He worked the problem rather than say, how is this good for me personally, or me politically solely? And that's why I'm another fan of him. Now, he usually tried to do both. How's it good for me and what's good for the public? But, that's nothing wrong with it. I think that. So that was, a pretty lasting legacy. Here you see the Black Hills. National parks, if they were established in 1900 something, that's TR. So here you can see several of those. Crater Lake. So the beginning of the national park system. Oh, you know what? I'm silly. I had that picture all along. That's the picture. That's the great picture. This one on the side view. Sometimes I forget what's on my own PowerPoint. There's John Muir. So, definitely be aware of John Muir and the Sierra Club. All right. So I want to talk for a minute about TR's big mistake. So one of his first mistakes was, at least political mistake, was early on when he became president. He said he would not seek a third term. You understand? Now, that was unnecessary because he had not been elected president in his own right, and there were no term limits on presidents. So he could easily have been elected for a third term, like easily. I think TR would have sailed to a third term. But he respected the precedent of George Washington, right? The two-term precedent. So he doesn't break that. He doesn't, run for re-election in 1912. In 1908. He does run for re-election in 1912, which is kind of tricky, because he's going to run for president on a different party in that year. But definitely be aware that was a mistake. And then I don't have a slide of it, but I'll mention it. We were due for a recession, and we had one. It was a Wall Street driven recession, which are more and more in the 20th century are where the recessions are going to come from. But it's sometimes called the Roosevelt recession or the Roosevelt panic. But the problem with it was, and I really should make a PowerPoint slide of this. So I'm going to do that. Let me go ahead and do this now. The Roosevelt recession was a result of lack of regulation. Well, some would criticize that view, but that's the argument I'm going to make. Lack of regulation of Wall Street led to over speculation in the stock market. Okay, so that sounds relatively familiar, right? In the NYSE, in the New York Stock Exchange, right? And so one of the outcomes of this is how could the government fix it, right? Like, what can now TR rails against Wall Street when this happens. He's going to just really attack this, right? And of course, it's going to result in, you know, the typical stuff that happened with panics, which is like a run on the banks and unemployment. And he is just going to say the reason for this is greed, right? And over speculation. Now, the good news is that as a result of this, there's going to be a law passed called the Aldrich-Vreeland Act. Okay, it's passed in 1908. And what it does is, for the first time, it authorized banks to issue emergency currency. So one of the reasons why that's noteworthy is that the major problem in the U.S. still, as far as fiscal problem, or rather monetary problem, let's call it that, the major monetary problem of the era was inelasticity. Now that's a mouthful. An inelastic monetary supply, which meant when you have runs on the bank needs to counteract that with having money available so that people don't panic, so that people feel safer about their money and thus don't run on the bank. You know, that's the whole idea. The problem is that you could not get more money to the banks because our government did not have a method in 1908 to create money like on the spot. Today, our government does this. Like, we have one of the most flexibly created monetary supplies ever, and that is called the Federal Reserve System. So if the Fed senses inflation, it can nudge interest rates. I mean, it could do like micro pinpointing of the economy, right? Well, that didn't exist. Prior to the Federal Reserve, there is nothing that allowed the federal government to immediately respond to economic crises. So the reason why the Great Recession doesn't become the Great Depression II is the Federal Reserve steps in, all right, and works with the U.S. Treasury. So this law paves the way, all right? This law paves the way for the Federal Reserve System. Now, it doesn't create the Federal Reserve. I don't want to confuse you and say, oh, well, he makes the Federal Reserve. No, that's Woodrow Wilson, big time, Woodrow Wilson, all right? But it does allow for the idea that the government can inject money in quickly when you need to, okay? And of course, the beauty of the Federal Reserve is that it can contract the monetary supply when it needs to. So by raising and lowering, I don't want to give you the whole lesson on the Federal Reserve, but the point is that this does happen in 1907, okay, and 1908. So it doesn't last too long. It certainly doesn't last into, the next administration. It's like about a year and a half, and it's noteworthy, but it mostly affects big business like Wall Street investors. Okay, so I would know the Aldrich-Vreeland Act. Now, President Roosevelt is when his term is up, he's going to take a trip to Africa, and it is going to be highly documented. Like, people are going to send along reporters, and there are going to be people who read all about it. And he goes down multiple, these big game hunts. He's shooting elephants and, all these neat places in Africa. So I want to pop the map up here. That's what I was looking for, right? So here he is in Africa. And if you're not a big game hunter, I respect that point of view. You're not into killing yaks and water buffaloes and leopards. But TR loved it. He absolutely loved hunting. It was one of his great pastimes. Here he goes way down the river into Africa. So he's exploring. I guess that map didn't really play out well, but he's exploring the African interior, which is fairly new. But then, so here's what he kills. He kills, the group kills. Of course, it says he and his son did the most of the shooting. 17 lions, 3 leopards, 7 cheetahs, 9 hyena, 11 elephant, 10 buffalo, 11 black rhino, which you definitely couldn't do now, and 9 white rhino. Okay. And yeah, so he was a huge fan of hunting. It says here he was a lifetime member of the NRA, which, by the way, anybody who's a member of the NRA is a lifetime member. But nonetheless, it's, that he was very supportive of it. But what happened, what's interesting to me, also on this trip, and it's really kind of interesting that TR would get maudlin about anything, but he gets sick. I don't remember what sickness he has. I'll check real quick, but he gets ill a while in Africa. And, let's see here. It says, what did he get sick with? I forget what sickness he had. It was some sort of like illness, heavy illness that you could get, like malaria or something like that. Yeah, here it is. And nonetheless, he is going to tell his team, his group that he's with, to leave him behind and go on without him. Like, y'all go on. Like they're going to abandon Theodore Roosevelt in the jungles of Africa while he's sick, but it's kind of like typical TR, like, no, y'all should finish the trip, y'all go ahead without me. But he survives, obviously, and makes it back to the United States, okay? So then let's ask ourselves, what kind of president was he? So if I have to give you a reason to learn TR, here it is, all right? And I would definitely know TR's sort of legacies. I think the question 45 is relevant to this. So he doesn't fully tame capitalism. And I don't know if anybody has ever fully tamed capitalism, but keep in mind, in America, we believe in ordered liberty. We also believe in a mixed economy. So this is the beginning of creating a mixed economy, which means some government regulation and oversight. Not the beginning, but the real beginning. If you think about the Interstate Commerce Act, not really used before Roosevelt. If you think about the Sherman Antitrust Act, not really used before Roosevelt. So he's the guy who actually puts teeth in these regulations. Okay. He finds a way, and I love this about both TR and FDR, to bridge the gap between an oligarchy run by corporations, a plutocracy, and socialism, which is the other extreme, so to speak. And so in our country, the reason why it's worked so well for so many people, I believe, is that we're neither of those two extremes. We are a mixed economy where, yes, we have really wealthy people, but we also have a very vibrant, successful middle class, right? And that's TR's objective. That was the square deal, was to find the sort of the middle between the two groups, between labor and owners, so rather than adopt socialism, he kind of saves America for capitalism, I would argue. His cousin's going to do the same thing. Now, again, his work, he's the first president to truly leave a conservationist legacy, an environmentalist legacy. There have been a couple other laws passed before TR, but not really enforced much and not really made into policy much. Every future progressive will be evaluated against TR, meaning, did they improve the quality of life of the American public by the government? So if you think about like the Pure Food and Drug Act, I can't tell you how important that is for the American public. So important that we forget that there's the reason why food is healthy is the government told the companies got to make healthy food. Because before this, your food killed you, it made you sick. He loved being president. He absolutely wanted to be president in his own right. That's one of the reasons why he wanted the Panama Canal in his first term. He called it a bully pulpit, meaning it's bully. It's wonderful. It's great. Bully did not mean beat people up. Bully, it meant spectacular. And so he loved being president. And I think he is the first truly international president that we had. Meaning, maybe McKinley, but usually McKinley is from a commercial point of view. Mostly. But TR viewed us as a military power, which no other president really had seen us as. Meaning, if you think about Washington, his proclamation is neutrality, right? Neutrality. You think about Lincoln, the military is strong, but it's to fight Americans. We're fighting each other. So TR is going to actually make America an international country. And the Great White Fleet, particularly, which is his product, is going to be something that he uses to elevate our prestige. Now, he had announced that he wouldn't run for re-election, and he didn't. You know, he chose not to. But he handpicked his successor, and his successor was William Howard Taft, who we've already mentioned. You know, Taft was over there in the Philippines. He'd run the commission pretty well, considering how tough it was, right? And you know, I would remind you that TR was our first ex-president who was young. TR was 51 years old when he left office. 51. That's like 3 years older than me. All right. You know, so I think about President Obama. He is going to be around for a while, right? Former President Obama. Of course, former President Carter is still around, and who would have thought that, right? But you know, President Roosevelt is going to be around a while after being president. So he wants whoever is the Republican successor to be someone who shares his vision. And he believes that man is William Howard Taft. So here's Taft. By the way, you know, I'm a fan of Taft too, but Taft has been, as you might imagine, the butt of many jokes. And the reason for that is, of course, his modification to the White House bathtub. And so, as far as I know, and I've looked this in several sources, this is 350-pound President Taft's bathtub. So he was a big guy. They said, you know, when he laughed, you know, he was filled with mirthquakes. So big fella. And he was apparently like one of these big guys like Chris Farley who are spry on their feet. He could dance comfortably with these little Filipino ladies. You know, so here's 350-pound Taft swinging these 80-pound little ladies around, you know, but why not? It's awesome. But that's his bathtub. And they had to reinforce the White House floor to put this big boy in there. So he was a big guy. And you know, the neat thing about Taft is that he didn't really want to be president. He'd always wanted to be a judge. And so later, he is going to become Chief Justice William Howard Taft. He's the only president in American history to be on the Supreme Court after being president or before. So in other words, he is a Supreme Court justice later, and you know, the Taft Court is a real thing. So Taft's problem, and it's not, you know, it's one of those things where it's like sort of unfortunate, but it seems like Taft's problem, his biggest criticism, is that he was sort of like too nice. And by that I mean like he really didn't have the demeanor of TR to manipulate the Republican Party. The thing I give credit to Donald Trump about is he literally just wrenched the control of the Republican Party from the Republican establishment. You know, if you look back, I mean, guys, think about who the candidates were. McCain couldn't stand Trump, right? Mitt Romney, he can't stand Trump. He still can't, right? The Bushes, they can't stand Trump, right? So all the presidents or past elected candidates have been openly anti-Donald Trump, right? So TR had that sort of like power and charisma that he could control the Republican Party, including the Congress. Taft couldn't. Taft was not that kind of personality. He wasn't that persuasive. He was more genial, more like a friendly guy. And so unfortunately for him, he's going to have a party that is sort of like glad to be done with TR in a sense. Like the Republicans couldn't control TR. It just couldn't. I mean, he was bigger than them. And so with Taft, they're going to try to get him to be more of a go along with kind of guy. But also Taft was not as gifted of coining the phrase. Remember, TR could make everything a speaking moment. Like he could always find a good line to give. He was very smart on his feet. Taft would make blunders. He would say things that he didn't mean to say, kind of like Biden. You know, Biden, they say, suffers from foot and mouth syndrome. You know, so that's one of the reasons why you haven't. Biden's giving his first press conference this week, but he's known for saying silly stuff, like when people talk to him. You know, gaffe prone, we would call that. So, nonetheless, Taft is now in there, and he is a progressive. I want to make sure of that, but I shouldn't just default tell you he's in there. Who do the Dems nominate? Well, third time's not the charm. You know, Henry Clay didn't work. It doesn't work for William Jennings Bryan either. Bryan runs again. This time he's not running on gold. You know, that ship has sort of sailed, but he's running on anti-imperialism. Okay, on opposing imperialism, and really, you know, the Republicans and TR has made it very clear that Taft is their guy, and so this is an easy win for the Republicans. I know the South. Keep in mind that not a lot of people down here comparably. So the solid South's going to vote Democrat no matter what. But Bryan only wins a couple Western states. Clearly, the populist narrative has played out, right? And so let's look at Taft's most signature decision. Taft's most important decision is an utter failure, and it's called dollar diplomacy. What Taft is hoping to do is get away from imperialism to some degree. He doesn't want U.S. troops being sent everywhere all the time. So he theorizes under what's called dollar diplomacy that if he and the federal government encourage businesses to invest money in these countries, then life will get better in these countries. You understand? So like put jobs in Honduras or put jobs in Nicaragua, and then life will be better there, right? That sounds good in premise. That's kind of good, right? The problem is that unfortunately the countries that these businesses are being told to invest money into, these businesses don't want to do that. Like they don't want to put money in Haiti. They don't want to put money in Honduras. And the reason is as you might imagine, there's a lot of disorder in those countries. There's a lot of chaos in those countries. So what that means is they don't really do that. They don't invest much money there at all. And what it leads to, unfortunately for Taft and America and those countries, is we end up sending forces there to try to quell rebellion. So we're going to send troops into Cuba, into Honduras, into Nicaragua, particularly. And so the book mentions that 2,500 Marines are going to be sent into Nicaragua to stop a rebellion. All right. So in other words, Taft doesn't succeed at all. He also wanted to do this in China, in Manchuria. And that's a total bust as well, because the Japanese are already over there, and they're not going to give up their territorial, sort of possessions. And so basically, this is a big bust. Now, today, American companies are invested all over the world. But even now, most American companies do not want to invest factories or raw material extraction in a place where whatever they build might get taken over by the government of a rebellious country, right? If Nicaragua has a revolution and their government says, "Oh well, you've created this train, but now we're going to take that," so these businesses just don't really do this very much, and ultimately, U.S. forces are sent into Latin America, which is not what Taft wanted to do. So here's a Taft quote about dollar diplomacy. The diplomacy of the present administration is sought to respond to the modern ideas of commercial intercourse, trade. The policy has been characterized as substituting dollars for bullets. Probably true. It is one that appeals to humanitarian, sound policy strategy, and commercial interests. So in other words, Taft doesn't want to, he argues, send troops into these places, but he ends up doing it to try to get order and stability there. And as you can see, as soon as Wilson becomes president, he cancels it, all right? And this was a complete failure. So Taft, when it comes to foreign policy, he's over, right? He doesn't get a win there at all. So that brings us to what about Taft, the progressive? Okay, and Taft as a progressive is quite successful. I think in many ways he's overshadowed by TR, but he shouldn't be. Taft is a sound legal mind, later Chief Justice, and he is going to go after some of the biggest companies in America because of their monopolistic power. And so most notable for me is the suit against Standard Oil. The dissolution, and the other notable one is the suit against U.S. Steel. So these two particularly, but if you look at Standard Oil, when they bust Standard, it is Rockefeller's Standard, right? When they busted into 34 companies, those companies will be powerful. Like if you think about it, Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron are all billion-dollar companies, right? So I would argue, if you're looking back at deregulation advocates, this doesn't set back those companies that much, and it allows for more competition. Just keep in mind, Standard was basically the only existing business. All right. Yes, total horizontal integration. Exactly. He brings a lawsuit against American Tobacco. But what's really interesting is his suits against U.S. Steel and International Harvester, both of which are J.P. Morgan companies, banking syndicate companies, and both of which have been approved the mergers of by TR. So in other words, he busts monopolies that TR had allowed to be formed. And so, right. Well, and also because TR considered them good trust, right? Who had considered them so-called good trust. And that was the distinction between TR and others, is that not all monopolies were bad. It was kind of like a perception reality question. And for him, it was more, for TR, it was more important to leave an impression than it was to try to break all the trust of it, you know. And so this is going to really tick off TR, this thing right here. But more importantly for that, Taft is going to support a tariff that was a real mistake. Okay. And this tariff is, I say real mistake, the support of it was a mistake. The name of the tariff is a giant bathtub. Sorry. Let me copy. I was going to type it in there. Give me a second. Silly teacher. It's called the Payne-Aldrich tariff. Now, if you're scoring at home, you know, he being Taft, is a Republican. So, you know, it kind of makes sense. You would think that the Republicans would create a tariff that would, you know, raise tariff rates. Now, what Taft had wanted, as had the progressives within his party, particularly the progressives, is actually to have a Republican lowered tariff. So this is the first time in American history that you have a debate within Republicans over what should we do with the tariff. And so progressives viewed lower tariffs as a progressive goal, not because of the cost of goods for Southerners per se, or for, you know, consumers alone, but because of free trade. Free trade is a neoliberal philosophy. It's a very progressive philosophy that believes that if you trade with other countries, you are less likely to war with other countries. You understand? And so they want more of that. Well, the Payne-Aldrich tariff starts out as, you know, as going to be a reduction. But by the time they're done, the tariff is actually an increase. Okay? The tariff doesn't reduce anything, really. And then Taft's going to go a step farther and foolishly call it, and you may have read this, the best Republican bill ever. Right? Like the best Republican bill ever. And you think about that. Keep in mind, this is the party that created civil rights acts. You know, this is all the laws that were created under President TR, under Roosevelt, or under Lincoln. You know, the freaking Transcontinental Railroad, or all number of things. Right? So to call this the best Republican bill ever, you know, is really, I mentioned that Taft is capable of putting mouth, right? Oops, my bad, I didn't say that. And this is not a great bill, and really progressives are really mad about this. And this is going to lead to further divisions within the party, because you have the progressive wing who are now angry at the sort of old guard who are supporting the high tariff. Okay. So they're going to be accusing Taft of being an old guard guy, right? As opposed to you know, a reformer. And then this is the straw that breaks the camel's back. So I told you earlier that Gifford Pinchot, the head of the forestry department, was a good personal friend of Theodore Roosevelt. Like they were friendly friends, you know, close friends. And Taft's Secretary of the Interior. Now keep in mind, the Secretary of the Interior is the boss of the forester, head of the forestry. So the cabinet level Interior Department. Forestry department inside the Interior Department. So like the cabinet member, Secretary of the Interior, and keep in mind the Interior Department runs the nation's parks, the nation's lands, anything that involves government-owned land. That's the Interior Department, right? So Ballinger, is accused by Pinchot. Now that was not a very smart call on Pinchot's part to accuse his boss of being corrupt, right? It's because of Pinchot's, well, he felt comfortable speaking his mind under Theodore Roosevelt, and he stayed on under Taft, and now he's speaking his mind, and that ain't so cool, particularly when it's undermining his boss. And Taft's AG says that's not true. You know, he's not corrupt. And it seems pretty clear that Ballinger didn't do anything corrupt, you know, nothing against the rules. Taft, though, fires Pinchot. And Pinchot was like a hero to a lot of conservationists, you know, environmentalists, and progressives. So when Taft fires TR's good buddy, That's the straw that breaks the camel's back. So you have not progressive tariff, right? You have this ridiculous language of the best bill ever. You have breaking up trusts that TR had allowed, right? And then the Pinchot affair, Ballinger-Pinchot affair or controversy means that TR is looking for a fight. Now keep in mind, he's only 55 years old, right? So he decides he is going to run again in 1912. And, you know, this is an amazing moment, really, because in this election, you're going to have, by all accounts, 4 progressive candidates. Okay. So, you know, your choice was between how much of a progressive did you want, you know? So that's an amazing election, really. So let's take a look at it, and we'll talk about TR running. So it's 1912, and of course, Taft will be renominated. The TR tried to get the nomination at the Republican convention. His supporters nominated him, but in the end, the Taft members of the Republican Party controlled sort of like the nominating process. So they were able to, it's kind of like Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders a couple of years ago. Like the Clinton folks were the ones running the Democratic National Convention and the Democratic Party. So they kind of made sure that that's how Hillary played out, you know, ahead of anyway of Bernie Sanders. So the Republicans are excited that Taft, you know, he's had a relatively decent presidency, you know, like in terms of electability, and they think that they're going to do okay. But the problem is that TR decides to run, and when the Republicans nominate Taft, you would think perhaps TR won't run, right? Since, you know, he ran for the nomination and didn't get it. Yeah, he's still going to run. I am really off today. Look at that. I still got big Taft. Sorry, I haven't given this PowerPoint in a while. So Taft is running on prosperity. You know, he's running on the fact that the Roosevelt recession's a distant past now, and his administration had done a pretty good job. And he is a conservative by the mind of many progressives, but he is certainly a progressive by the mind of the traditional Republicans. That makes it, and it's all about labels, right? So he's all fired up now about beating TR. Okay. And here you can see this guy down here. And I want to mention this guy for a second. So Bob La Follette was really one of the great figures of Republican history because he was the governor of Wisconsin who in many ways pioneered, you know, a lot of the progressive reforms that you've seen mentioned in the progressives. So that's this little fella here is, they called him the White Plume Knight. I'll show you a real picture of fighting Bob La Follette. And Bob La Follette, the righteous reformer. So he had some of the coolest hair of any aspirant for the presidency. So I'm going to take this picture out since I already showed it to you. Put this picture in. So that's fighting Bob. He's got this cool mane of hair that was very, like, kind of sticking up. And by this point, it was white. But he doesn't get the nomination for either the Republican Party or for the Progressive Party. So he's a guy who gets pushed out of the way, so to speak, fighting Bob. All right. And so he won't be ever a candidate for president. So that brings us to, what do the Republicans run on? It's a very progressive element of this. So if I'm going to put in here in red, progressive objectives. So a good chunk of President Taft's platform was progressive. Now, some, you know, the progressives were not as vocal at all about the gold standard. And progressives very largely supported city and state reforms. But, you know, if you look at workman's comp, now keep in mind, workman's compensation is a new idea, the idea of getting paid if you're injured on the job, right? The Federal Trade Commission is a new idea. So child labor prevention. So there are lots of real progressive goals in here. And that's President Taft. But the GOP's in trouble. As you can see, the elephant's been cut in half, and you have, what TR says, the rights of humanity, or he calls Taft the representative of special privilege. So TR is going to be nominated. And somebody who asked, he's relatively recently come back from his trip to Africa where he was sick. And somebody's going to ask him, well, Mr. President, how do you feel? And he's like, I'm as healthy as a bull moose, right? And so when he says I'm as healthy as a bull moose, that word bull moose, the phrase, will move into the American lexicon and become the Progressive Party's symbol. So there had never been a progressive party before. Up to this point, progressivism was just an attitude, a philosophy, a belief. Now you actually have, for the first time, a national party called the Progressives. But I want to tell you something. I said it was a national party. It's not really a national party at all. It's a party of one, right? It's TR and all of his supporters. That's the Progressive Party. So what this means is there's no down ticket state candidates that are progressive. There are no local candidates that are called progressive. This is just TR's vehicle to run for president. Okay. And so he is going to give several speeches, many speeches. In fact, he's going to do another firestorm of speeches. And I would like you to know what TR calls his new campaign. He calls it New Nationalism. New Nationalism. So no more square deal, but now we have this thing called New Nationalism. So, and I'm going to give you what New Nationalism looks like in just a second. But I do like to mention that during this campaign, President Roosevelt is going to get shot in the chest. Okay. He's going to be on the road and a guy is going to try to kill him. It's 1912. I forget which location he's in, but he gets an assassin tries to kill him, shoots him right in the chest. Here's the shirt he was wearing. He goes into the assembly hall after that, after getting shot, Milwaukee. He was shot in Milwaukee. And he gives an hour and a half speech after getting shot in the chest. So that should tell you something about TR, right? Like this guy got shot and then he went and gave a speech. So why did he bleed to death? Why didn't he die? The speech was folded up in his pocket, in his breast pocket of his coat. So like this, and it's an hour and a half speech. So, that's a lot of talking. So it's like folded up in his coat pocket. So when the bullet went through, it slowed the speech. The speech slowed the bullet down enough that it just pierced his skin kind of relatively deeply above his nipple. And he bled all over the place, but obviously didn't kill him. So again, TR gets shot on the way to giving a speech and still delivers the speech. How cool is that? I don't remember the reasoning of why he was shot. I think the guy was kind of like Cholgas, kind of a nut, like not any specific, not like trying to get. I think he just wanted to kill him, So yeah, here's the front page of the story, and he gives this speech afterwards. It's really amazing. Now the problem, of course, for TR, one of the problems is that he's still running against the legacy of the two terms. And he thinks this is not a problem because it's no longer consecutive, right? Like 4 years off. But there are a lot of people who are mistrustful about a president wanting to be president that much. But nonetheless, you have the bull moose move into the zoo of the American animals, right? So back here you see the donkeys and the elephant, and here's the moose, right? So what's interesting about this new nationalist progressive candidacy is it's extraordinarily progressive. Look at what this lists. Now, by the way, when he gets the nomination, when he's nominated at the convention, at the progressive convention, he is going to be nominated by this person. Let me stick up a picture. Yes, that's what I meant. Let's see here. Well, no, not that person. Well, here we go. His nominate was seconded. That's what. Okay, it was seconded at this convention by NALSA's. Which representative they sent? I'm trying to remember now who nominated him. It helps you recognize it, how much support he has. Let's see here. Do you guys see it? Control. Jane Addams. Yeah, I knew it was somebody important. Jane Addams. Yeah. Oh, wow, that's important. So it took me a minute to remember or to find it. So Jane Addams is going to be the lady who nominates at the convention or seconds the nomination. Um, I'll put that down here. Jane Addams support. So he actually and these progressives actually are openly supporting women's suffrage. Like that's Wilson definitely doesn't do that. All right. He supports an income tax and an estate tax, lowered tariffs, campaign finance reform, monetary reform, minimum wage laws, social insurance, that's Social Security, all right, no more child labor, and workman's comp. So it's like a complete progressive nomination. In fact, it's far more progressive than when he was as president. Like this is very close to Franklin Roosevelt's campaign, right? So TR is now like a full-throated progressive, full support of the progressive movement. And that's interesting because it means he's moved to the left of Taft. Okay. Lots of stuff in here. Now, I mentioned that there are 4 what you might consider progressives. Another candidate is Eugene Debs, and he runs as the socialist candidate. And keep in mind, during this period in history, socialism was really popular. Look at these numbers here. In the election of 1912, almost 1 million people vote socialist. Understand? So the Socialist Party is really making some strides politically around the country. So he's not in prison yet. I shouldn't use this picture, but he's going to run again for president later. But Debs is running as the socialist candidate. Okay. And he will have the support of America's most famous socialist labor union, which is the Industrial Workers of the World, the Wobblies, the IWW. So he's running as kind of like the union ticket and, you know, the union labor organization support. So that's progressive. And here, if you look, he's completely socialist kind of stuff of that day. By the way, today we would call this stuff democratic socialism. Like there's a difference. It really is. And you might want to know that. But the key figure that was going to win is Woodrow Wilson. And I have enjoyed Woodrow Wilson's biography at times. He was a Virginian, but pretty early on, he moved to New Jersey. He went to Princeton. And then he later became president of Princeton University. He was our first president to have a PhD. He's Dr. Woodrow Wilson. He has a PhD in history. And so he was an expert on government and study of government. He was a Southerner born, but you know, at this point was a progressive governor of New Jersey. Definitely a Democrat, and small d Democrat too, meaning he was a Jeffersonian. He believed that, he believed that bigness equaled badness. And that means both big government and big business, right? So he wanted to fragment power like Jefferson believed in, and to turn the hands back to the people. But he has a problem, and that is, can he rescue the party from William Jennings Bryan? Because William Jennings Bryan has been he's put the Democrats in a box. Like they can't go any further. And you know, there are people who are talking about President Trump after his loss in this last election. Will he continue to be the driving force of the Republican Party? And if so, will they win an election because of that? Because, you know, he lost by a sizable amount in the last election. Well, Wilson, you know, he's coming off of Bryan's thrice defeats now. And so he's like, he couldn't stand Bryan, by the way. He couldn't stand his style of politics, the evangelical. Now, I will say this. Wilson's father was a Presbyterian minister. So he was raised very sternly, very strictly, and he was a strong believer in Calvinism and Presbyterianism. So he was a very sort of cerebral, intellectual guy, kind of the opposite of Bryan. And the problem is in the South and in the West, you know, Bryan was still very popular. So he's going to find a way around that. And what is he going to do is actually he doesn't find a way around it. His wife does. His wife invites Bryan over to his house. And they eat dinner and they kind of have to talk to each other. And Wilson is trying to get Bryan's support. And he needs his support because he needs Bryan to kind of vocally say to the Democrats, I want Wilson to win. Now, what's going to happen, and this is really ridiculous, is Wilson is going to make Bryan Secretary of State when he gets elected. Kind of like a corrupt bargain sort of thing, right? But then he will virtually not talk to him at all in that role. So Wilson will be like his own Secretary of State. that makes sense. Like he rarely ever deals with Brian. So Brian is more like a political figure at this point. Okay, so he's going to get the nomination, and he's already made a huge name for himself at removing corruption and civil service reform and doing all kinds of good stuff in the New Jersey government. All right. Now, one of the big problems is the issue of the South. Right. So do I go progressive, Wilson would have to ask, or do I go what's called reactionary? So reactionary is opposing change, is wanting to go back to some way tradition, right? And so what he is going to end up doing is trying to, as easy as possible, not alienate Southern voters, as difficult as that's going to be, because you got to get Southern votes. Now, typically they're going to vote, but you also got to win some votes in the North. So look at this platform. Tariff reduction, term limits, direct election of senators, a Department of Labor, stronger antitrust laws, no central banking. Now, you will see that Wilson does not support women's suffrage. Now, I also want to mention over here that Wilson's his platform is called New Freedom. So you've got TR running on New Nationalism, Wilson running on New Freedom, Eugene Debs running as a socialist, and TR running as a bull moose. That's a whole lot of options if you're picking from this progressive buffet. But I told you the South is going to be a tricky part, right? So how to get the South supporting all of this is you need Brian to help, particularly the West of the South, the agrarian voters, because there's nothing agrarian about Woodrow Wilson. Take a look at this guy. He doesn't look very much farming, right? All right. So let's get into the issues. Perhaps the most challenging issue of that day is not so much the issue of tariffs, although that is still important, but is the issue of blacks and immigrants. That's familiar for the Democratic Party, right? Blacks and immigrants. And so he has to figure out how to get over that hurdle, right? So how's he going to do that? Well, when it comes to tariff reform, he is going to go with a traditional Democratic role, which is lower tariffs. All right. No shock there. But keep in mind, there are progressive Republicans who want to lower the tariff now. So that's an option he might win on, right? Lower the tariff. By the way, national pastime, baseball, already then. Okay. The good news is you've got 4 environmentalists running, basically, right? The bad news is for the Republicans, they're totally divided over this thing inside the government. The only candidate who openly endorses women's suffrage is TR. Well, no, Debs does too, but TR is the only major candidate of the group to endorse women's suffrage. Keep in mind, that's relevant because in many Western states, they have women's suffrage. You understand? Keep in mind, states determine voting rights.
Students, this is National School Breakfast Week. This week, we're sharing information about the school breakfast program. Although COVID-19 has completely altered the cafeterias and the traditional way of operating, we hope that you're still enjoying the school breakfast meals offered to you each morning. Breakfast for students is free, and we have made breakfast meals simple so that it's easy to eat at your desk. We are providing what we think are your most favorite items, so be sure to enjoy a school breakfast. It may give you the energy you need to get through your morning. I'd like to offer congratulations to Jackson Kime and also to our Scholastic Bowl team under the leadership of Mr. Book. Jackson Kime placed on the all-region team for our Scholastic Bowl based on his performance in the tournament. Job well done, Mr. Kime. And also, we would like to congratulate our FBLA members who competed in the Longwood Region FBLA competition, which was held virtually this year. Congratulations to the following FBLA members for their success in regional competition